I want you to just close your eyes for a second. Well, unless you're driving, of course. Please don't do that.
Yeah, keep your eyes on the road, please.
Right. But if you can, I want you to imagine the music of the 1980s. Like, what immediately pops into your head?
Oh, I mean, it's neon, right? Just an explosion of neon excess.
Exactly. If you're like most people, you're picturing these incredibly pristine, shimmering synthesizers, specifically that super bright digital sound of the Yamaha DX7.
Oh, yeah, that synth was on literally every pop record. You
And
couldn't escape it.
you really couldn't. And you're picturing the massive hair, the shoulder pads, those huge, big budget MTV music videos that felt like, I don't know, mini movies.
Right, it's all very choreographed, very slick.
Totally. It was an era defined by a relentless, hyper-produced, more is more philosophy.
Oh, without a doubt.
Like pop music was intricate, new wave was polished to this mirror shine, and rock music was all about flashy guitar solos and, sheer technical gymnastics.
It was undeniably the era of addition. I mean, if a song sounded good with 2 synthesizer tracks, the prevailing philosophy back then dictated that, well, it would sound exponentially better with 10.
More tracks, more layers, more everything.
Exactly. Everything was maximized for immediate, glossy impact. And the recording studios themselves were getting super complex, transitioning from analog tape to early digital stuff.
So artists are basically acting like kids in a candy store.
Yeah, they're utilizing every single bell and whistle available to them on those massive mixing boards.
Right. It was the era of addition.
Yeah.
But today, for this deep dive, we are going to look at a band that looked at all of that complexity, the gloss and the glitter and the technical flash, and they decided to do the exact opposite.
The absolute polar opposite.
We are diving into the story of a band that chose a radical, almost dangerous path of subtraction. They stripped everything away until there was barely anything left but raw noise and repetition.
And the wildest part is, by doing that, by stripping it all back, they somehow managed to create this absolutely infinite universe of sound.
Which is completely counterintuitive.
Oh, it's an incredibly difficult thing to achieve mathematically and acoustically. I mean, to create more space by giving the listener less to hold on to. That requires a total masterclass in tension and restraint.
It really does. So we've got a massive stack of retrospectives, archival interviews, and music history analyses in front of us today, and they all focus entirely on a relatively obscure, highly uncompromising underground UK band called Spacemen 3.
A phenomenal group, truly unique.
Our mission for this deep dive is to unpack how they completely redefined psychedelic rock. We're going to explore the literal mechanics of how they turned pure noise into architecture.
Which is such a fascinating process.
And we'll look at how they laid the essential groundwork for the modern ambient and shoegaze music that you probably have playing in your headphones right now while you work or study. Okay, let's unpack this.
So, to really understand the magnitude of what Spacemen 3 accomplished, we have to first set the stage. We need to look at the environment they emerged from because, music doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Right, context is everything.
Exactly. The UK indie scene in the early 1980s was a fascinating place, but it was also deeply fragmented and super confused. You had these lingering heavy shadows of post-punk.
Right, and just for anyone who isn't a massive music history nerd, when we say post-punk, we're talking about what happened immediately after that initial safety pin and mohawk explosion of punk rock in the late 70s.
Yeah, because punk burned out incredibly fast.
It really did. And the bands that came next took that DIY energy but made it colder, more experimental, and frankly, a lot more anxious. Bands like Joy Division or Wire.
Precisely. The initial fiery explosion had faded, leaving behind this really angular, tense atmosphere. And then, simultaneously, you had the emergence of gothic rock.
Oh, right, the eyeliner and the fog machines.
Yeah, bands like Bauhaus or the Sisters of Mercy, they were bringing these deep theatrical shadows and brooding atmospheres. And then, aside from that, you had the broader DIY indie rock scene.
Which was doing its own thing entirely.
Right. They were trying to expand their boundaries, but at its core, that scene was still very focused on writing a clever pop hook. Or, projecting a specific stylized image for the weekly music press like the NME.
Gotta look good for the magazine covers.
Exactly. But Spacemen 3 bypassed absolutely all of it. They didn't want to be gloomy goths, they didn't want to be angular post-punks, and they definitely didn't care about pop hooks.
Not even a little bit. They adopted a philosophy rooted in extreme minimalism, relentless repetition, and sustained ear-splitting feedback.
Which brings us to the 2 architects behind this entire sonic experiment.
Yes, we're talking about Jason Pierce, who would later become known as J Spaceman,
Hmm.
and Peter Kember, who took on the moniker Sonic Boom.
Such great stage names.
Oh, incredible name. So these two meet in the early 80s in a town called Rugby in Warwickshire, England. And looking at their history, the specific location where they grew up is absolutely critical to the sound they ended up making.
It really is. It's the sheer power of geographical boredom.
I love that phrase, geographical boredom.
It's true. Let's look at Rugby. This was not a cultural hub. It wasn't London. It wasn't Manchester. It wasn't a place teeming with underground clubs and independent record labels.
No avant-garde scene there.
Not at all. It was a closed-off, deeply boring provincial railway town. The Midlands of England during the early 80s were dealing with heavy industrial decline, high unemployment, and just a general sense of stagnation.
Sounds pretty bleak, honestly.
It was. There were very few options for young people looking for culture. And this is vital to understand their psychology. When you are a creative teenager in a place that offers you absolutely nothing, that boredom acts as a pressure cooker.
Because you can't just walk out your front door on a Friday night and soak up the local scene.
Right. There is no scene.
So what do you do?
Because they couldn't join an existing vibrant musical community, they were forced inward. They had to engage in deep, almost obsessive musical exploration entirely on their own just to entertain themselves.
They had to build their own world.
Exactly. Because the real world around them in Rugby was simply too gray and too dull.
So they end up curating their own reality through their record collections. They're just sitting in their bedrooms playing records over and over. And the retrospectives give us a very specific, highly curated list of the influences that were bleeding into this Rugby pressure cooker.
And it's a very telling list.
It really is, because they weren't listening to Duran Duran or Wham. They were obsessively listening to the Velvet Underground, the Stooges, the MC5, the 13th Floor Elevators, Suicide, Can, and the Modern Lovers.
If you take a step back and analyze that specific combination of influences, it serves as a perfect blueprint for what they were about to build.
Oh, totally. Break that down for us.
We have the raw, unhinged, violent energy of late 60s Detroit bands like the Stooges and the MC5.
Just pure aggression.
Right. Then you have the mind-expanding, wildly unpredictable psychedelic weirdness of the 13th Floor Elevators from Texas.
Such a strange, amazing band.
Yeah, and then you add the hypnotic, driving, almost mechanical rhythms of krautrock bands like Can. But the two most crucial pillars in their foundation were undeniably the Velvet Underground and Suicide.
Wait, I really want to stop here for a second and challenge this because this is wild to me. So they're bored teenagers in a provincial town, right?
Yeah.
Usually when kids in that exact situation pick up guitars, they want to be flashy guitar heroes. They want to play like Jimi Hendrix or Eddie Van Halen. They want to escape their boring town by becoming like traditional rock stars.
That's a standard trajectory, yeah.
But instead, they look at a band like Suicide. And for those who don't know, Suicide was this terrifying 1970s New York duo who used these harsh, primitive, incredibly repetitive drum machines and screaming synthesizers.
It was incredibly abrasive music.
They sounded like a panic attack in a subway station, and these two kids in Rugby look at that and think, yes, let's do that.
It's definitely an unconventional choice.
It's almost like they were intentionally building a musical sensory deprivation tank to escape their hometown.
Yeah.
Like they wanted to block out the boring reality of Rugby with a massive, impenetrable wall of pure, repetitive noise.
That sensory deprivation tank analogy is incredibly apt. It perfectly explains the psychological mechanism at play here. You've actually hit on the exact philosophical divergence between Spacemen 3 and almost every other band forming in the UK at that time.
Really? How so?
What you have to understand is that Pierce and Kember were absolutely not interested in playing well.
Like, technically speaking.
Right. Technical proficiency was completely irrelevant to them. They were entirely obsessed with the repetition they heard in the Velvet Underground's darker tracks,
Yeah.
like Sister Ray, and that harsh mechanical minimalism of Suicide.
So no showing off on the fretboard.
None. The objective wasn't to write a catchy 3-minute pop song with a clever chorus and a bridge. The goal was to find a single musical phrase, or literally just a single chord, and hold it.
Just hold one chord.
And hold it. And hold it long enough to fundamentally alter the listener's consciousness. They wanted to induce a trance state.
Man, it's almost a form of sonic hypnosis.
That's a great way to put it.
You bypass the intellectual part of the brain that's waiting for the next chord change, and you just hammer the primitive part of the brain until it surrenders.
Precisely. In the early 70s, the krautrock band Can utilized something called the motoric beat.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's a relentless, 44 drum pattern that
Okay.
never changes. It never does fills. It never crashes the cymbals for emphasis. It just drives forward constantly like tires on a highway.
Just totally hypnotizing.
Exactly. And Spaceman 3 took that concept of relentless, unchanging forward motion and applied it to heavy, distorted guitars.
So around 1982, they officially form the band. They bring in a rhythm section. Will Carruthers on bass and Johnny Maddock on drums eventually become the solidified lineup, and they choose the name Spacemen 3.
And they weren't being subtle with that name.
Not at all. When they picked that name, they were putting their two biggest obsessions right on the marquee. The name was explicitly chosen to evoke two things, space and drug sensations.
They are laying all their cards on the table from day one.
Yeah, they are telling the audience exactly what kind of trip they are intending to take them on.
And right from those early conceptual days in the rehearsal room, they established a rigid, almost dogmatic set of rules for their sound.
What kind of rules?
Well, it was defined by a drastic reduction in the number of chords used. Like, if you can play a song with one chord, don't use two.
That was strict.
It involved playing at an absolutely deafening volume. It relied heavily on amplifier feedback, utilizing deep, continuous drone sounds, and employing simple, unrelenting repetition. Everything was engineered toward this idea of a consciousness-altering soundscape.
But I'm looking at those rules, and it raises a massive logistical question for me.
Okay, what is it?
How does a band with a stated philosophy of having zero interest in traditional musicianship, a band that just wants to play one loud droning chord for 20 minutes, actually go into a recording studio and make an album? I mean, time is money in a studio, and engineers expect you to track distinct songs.
That's a very valid point.
So how do they make a cohesive album? Well, the short answer is they didn't.
No, they certainly did not.
They made something incredibly explosive and intensely messy. And that leads us directly into their 1986 debut album, Sound of Confusion.
Sound of the Confusion is exactly what the title promises. It is not a polished, polite debut.
Not even a little bit polite.
It is a literal collision of genres. You have to imagine garage rock, harsh noise, primitive blues, and heavy drone all crashing into each other in a completely unrefined, chaotic manner.
It sounds exhausting in the best way.
The recording cape is practically buckling under the weight of the distortion.
The retrospectives highlight two specific tracks from this record that really showcase this collision. First, there's a track called Ode to Street Hassle.
Yes.
It's a very clear, very direct homage to the Velvet Underground, specifically Lou Reed's solo work. You can hear that absolute commitment to the relentless chugging groove.
You really can.
But then on the other side of the spectrum, you have a track called Little Doll. And this is where that Detroit Stooges influence violently bleeds through.
It's so aggressive.
It really is. It's channeling this raw, almost physical energy. It's not a sound that asks for your permission to exist in the room.
It's far from polite. But underneath that raw, aggressive noise, something revolutionary was already happening on a structural level.
What do you mean?
Well, if you analyze the compositions, even at this early, chaotic stage, Spacemen 3 had ceased functioning like a traditional rock band. They were operating more like a piece of heavy industrial machinery.
Like a factory machine.
The best way to describe them at this point is not as a band, but as a drone device.
A drone device. Okay, let's unpack this concept because it feels absolutely central to everything they did and honestly everything that came after them in the indie scene. For the listener right now, what does it actually mean to operate as a drone device in a musical context? And mechanically, what even is a drone?
That's the crucial question. Musically speaking, a drone is a continuous, unchanging pitch or tone that plays underneath the rest of the music. Think of the bagpipes. You know, that constant humming note underneath the melody? That is a drone. Or the sitar in classical Indian music.
Right, that underlying hum that never stops.
Exactly. Now, in traditional Western rock or pop music, the song moves forward through chord changes.
Yeah.
You move from the verse chords to the chorus chords to the bridge.
The progression tells the story.
Right. The progression of the chords creates tension, and then it resolves that tension. Spacemen 3 threw that entire Western tradition out the window.
Just tossed it.
They minimized chord changes to the absolute breaking point. Instead of moving the song forward by changing notes, they created movement through shifting tones, through the texture of the distortion, and through the sheer sustained physical pressure of the volume.
Wow.
By anchoring their music to this relentless electric drone, they weren't just playing a song in a room, they were using sound to physically dominate the acoustic space.
And that intense desire to physically dominate the space translated into what sounds like one of the most bizarre, confrontational, and frankly confusing live concert experiences imaginable in the
Oh,
mid-1980s.
they were notorious.
Imagine you're a music fan in 1986. You buy a ticket to an indie rock show, you walk into the club, the lighting is incredibly dark, almost non-existent.
Just a moody cave.
Yeah. The band walks out, says absolutely nothing, and launches into a song. And the song just keeps going and going.
No breaks.
We're talking incredibly long, drawn-out pieces of music that just drone on a single chord. There's absolutely zero banter between songs. And no, hello, London, how are you feeling tonight? No introducing the band member.
They gave you nothing traditional.
And visually, the band is almost completely static. They are barely moving at all. Most of the time, they're sitting down on stools, staring at their instruments, or staring blankly into the dark.
Which was so jarring for audiences back then.
Now, I have to be honest and press you on this. If I go to a rock show, especially in the 80s when everything was about showmanship, I want to see energy.
Of course you do.
I want to see the lead singer jumping off the drum kit. I want to see the guitarist windmilling. I want sweat and charisma.
You want a show.
Right. If I'm standing in a dark, dingy room and the band is just sitting there motionless, refusing to look at me, and they're just playing one deafening chord for 15 solid minutes, I would feel ripped off.
A lot of people did.
Were they actually doing something brilliant? Or were they just hiding a profound lack of musical talent behind extreme volume and a pretentious attitude? Like, why wouldn't the audience just turn around and walk out?
It's a completely fair question, and honestly, many people did walk out. They were known for clearing rooms early in their career.
I believe it.
But your reaction speaks exactly to the conditioned expectations we bring to live entertainment. We expect to be visually entertained, but to understand their brilliance, we have to look at the psychology and the physics of their performance.
Get laid on me.
The stillness of the band, combined with the overwhelming, chest-rattling volume of the music, served a very specific, calculated purpose. When the band gives you absolutely nothing to look at, when they actively remove the visual spectacle of jumping around your brain, eventually stops trying to process the event as a visual performance.
Oh, interesting.
Because there's nothing to see, your visual cortex basically powers down and your auditory processing takes over completely. You are forced to stop watching the band, and instead you have no choice but to bathe in the sound.
So by actively refusing to perform in a traditional visual sense, the sound itself becomes the total focus.
Exactly.
It's not about watching four guys play instruments. It's about enduring the environment they are creating. You're standing in the club. You can't see anything. Your sternum is physically rattling from the bass frequencies. Your ears are ringing.
It's visceral.
You aren't tapping your foot to a beat. Your body is actually navigating the sound waves.
Precisely. The stillness was the spectacle. They were forcing the audience to surrender to the sonic environment. It was less like a rock concert and more like a heavy, vibrating ritual. The sound was so loud it became architectural. It was a physical wall in the room with you.
But as fascinating as that chaos and that aggressive stillness was, raw noise can only take a band so far before it just becomes a gimmick.
That's true. It can get old.
Right. Standing still and playing loud is a neat trick. But to survive, they had to figure out how to take that sheer noise and turn it into actual architecture. They had to refine those extreme aesthetics.
They needed to focus the beam.
Exactly. And that refinement requires a complete shift in how they recorded, leading us to what is widely considered their masterpiece, and also introducing us to one of the most highly misunderstood catchphrases in the history of music.
The massive turning point arrives in 1987 with their second album, The Person Prescription.
A huge leap forward.
Massive. This is the moment where the raw, unhinged, chaotic energy of their debut is meticulously organized. They actually brought in a producer who understood what they were trying to do.
Someone who got the vision.
Yes. The result is a floating, unified acoustic experience. Mathematically, they actually managed to reduce the number of notes they were playing even further compared to their debut, yet somehow the spatial perception of the sound expanded massively.
That's wild.
It sounds like it was recorded in a cathedral on Mars.
It's that magic trick of subtraction again. Fewer notes, but a much bigger universe. Looking at the track list, the song Walking with Jesus is constantly highlighted as the defining moment of this era.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a sprawling, hypnotic track. And historically, it's described as the absolute prototype for the shoegaze genre that would absolutely explode in the UK a few years later.
You can hear the blueprint right there.
The abrasive chaos is gone, replaced by this massive, echoing, beautiful wall of sound. And it's during this era of ultimate sonic refinement that the band popularizes their infamous slogan. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting.
I know where you're going with this.
Because if you know anything about Spacemen 3, or even if you just collected edgy indie rock t-shirts in the 90s, you probably know this phrase. The slogan is, taking drugs to make music to take drugs to.
Very provocative.
Right. Now, on the absolute surface level, if you just read that on a bumper sticker, it sounds like the ultimate edgy rock star provocation. It sounds like a bunch of pretentious guys just glorifying a hedonistic, wasted lifestyle to shock the parents and get a rise out of the conservative music press.
It is incredibly easy to dismiss it as a cheap marketing gimmick or just mindless glorification of substance abuse. But if you dig into interviews with Jason Pierce and Peter Kember from that era, you realize that assumption is entirely wrong.
Really? So what did they actually mean?
The phrase, taking drugs to make music to take drugs to, was actually an incredibly precise, deeply focused, and literal mission statement.
A mission statement?
Yeah. It wasn't about the drugs as a party mechanism or a social lubricant. It was a singular obsession with the concept of perceptual transformation.
Perceptual transformation, meaning changing the very mechanics of how the listener's brain processes reality and time.
Exactly. They viewed the music itself as a psychoactive device. They were meticulously engineering their sound using simple, relentless repetition, massive droning notes, endless layers of echoing delay, and sheer, undeniable sound pressure.
Basically building a sonic weapon.
Basically, all to organically induce an altered state of consciousness in the listener. They wanted the music to act as the drug. The substances they consumed were merely a tool for them to access a specific headspace in the studio.
Oh, I see.
But the music they recorded was designed to guide the listener into that exact same altered state, whether the listener was chemically altered or sitting completely sober in their living room.
They wanted to build a machine that altered consciousness. And if you're going to build a highly specific machine, you need very specific tools. The retrospectives are fantastic here because they give us the literal inventory of the gear they used to construct this psychoactive architecture.
The gear list is legendary.
It reads like a holy grail list for guitar nerds, but it's important to understand why they chose these tools. We are talking about Fender Jazzmasters, Fender Jaguars, and Gibson SGs. We're talking about classic Vox amplifiers and Fender Twin Reverb amps. And then, crucially, the effects fuzz pedals and echo units.
And we have to do a deep dive into how they utilize this gear because they completely flipped the traditional script on what good guitar playing was supposed to sound like.
They threw the rule book out the window.
They really did. They had absolutely zero interest in a clean, pristine, perfectly equalized tone. They were chasing something much wilder and much more volatile. Let's talk about amplifier feedback.
Okay, let's get into it.
In a traditional recording studio, feedback, that high-pitched screeching squeal you get when a microphone or a guitar pickup gets too close to an amplifier speaker, is considered an audio engineer's worst nightmare.
Oh, for sure. It pierces right through your skull.
Right. It's a literal accident. It means something has gone wrong with the signal path and the audio is bleeding back into itself.
Yeah, if you hear feedback on a pop record, someone is getting fired. It's the sound of someone messing up. But Spacemen 3 didn't hear an accident. They heard potential. They heard an entirely new instrument hidden inside the mistake.
They tamed the accident. Let's look at the physics of what they were doing.
Please.
Normally, you pluck a guitar string. The pickup translates that vibration into an electrical signal. It travels down the cable into the amplifier. The amplifier makes it 100 times louder, and the speaker pushes that sound wave out into the room.
Standard stuff.
But Spacemen 3 turned their Fender Twin Reverbs up so loud that the massive sound wave coming from the speaker physically hit the wooden body of their Fender Jazzmasters.
Wait, really? Like, the sound wave itself is hitting the guitar?
Yes. And the Jazzmaster has a very specific bridge design with a lot of string length behind the bridge, which resonates wildly. The sound wave from the amp physically vibrated those strings, which sent an even louder signal back to the amp, which pushed an even bigger sound wave back at the guitar.
Oh, wow. So it just feeds on itself.
It creates an infinite screaming loop.
So they aren't just playing the strings with a pick. They are literally playing the physics of the room.
Exactly.
They're standing at exact distances from their amplifiers, moving an inch forward or an inch back to manipulate the pitch of the screeching loop.
That's it. They took this harsh, unpredictable, howling noise and figured out how to control it, how to sustain it indefinitely, and how to shape it into a playable melodic instrument. They turn the mistake into the melody.
Okay, I want to try an analogy here to visualize what they're doing with this feedback and these pedals. Let's talk about the fuzz pedal, which is central to their sound.
Crucial piece of gear.
A clean guitar string vibrates in a smooth wave, a sine wave. It goes up and down smoothly. It sounds pleasant.
Right, very natural.
A fuzz pedal takes that signal and boosts it so hard that it hits the ceiling of the electronic circuit and gets chopped off flat. It becomes a square wave. It sounds harsh, synthetic, and massive.
Yes, the waveform is literally clipping. It's destroying the original sound and replacing it with pure, saturated harmonics.
So imagine a traditional, technically proficient guitarist like, say, Mark Knopfler from Dire Straits. He's like an artist painting a highly detailed photorealistic portrait with an incredibly fine, delicate brush. Every stroke is precise, fast, deliberate, and clean.
Perfect control.
Exactly. Spacemen 3 are not using a fine brush. They're taking a massive industrial-sized bucket of thick textured paint, and that paint is the square wave from the fuzz pedal and the infinite loop of the amplifier feedback, and they are just throwing it against the wall.
Splattering the whole room.
They are coating the entire room with it, layer after layer, adding tape echo so the sound bounces back on itself, until the paint is so thick you can literally feel it vibrating in your chest when you stand in the room. They aren't giving you detailed notes to look at. They're giving you a thick, physical environment to exist inside of.
That is a brilliant distinction. They prioritize the sustained physical texture of the sound over the technical execution of individual notes. And for a brief period in the late 80s, they achieved their perfect vibrating environment.
A fleeting moment of perfection.
Very fleeting. Because here is the tragedy of Spaceman 3. The level of intense, almost telepathic focus and singular vision required to maintain this shared illusion between two highly creative, deeply stubborn individuals was incredibly fragile.
It couldn't last.
No. And soon, the two minds behind the machine started to fracture under the pressure.
Which brings us to a period we can call the beautiful collapse. In 1989, the band releases the album Playing with Fire. From a critical standpoint, this is widely regarded as their absolute masterpiece.
Oh, undoubtedly.
The sound they had been chasing since they were bored teenagers in Rugby is fully realized. It is lush, expansive, and deeply hypnotic. But behind the scenes in the studio, the relationship between Jason Pierce and Peter Kember is rapidly, catastrophically deteriorating.
You can actually hear the tectonic plates shifting beneath the band if you listen closely to the record.
Really, it bleeds into the music.
Oh, absolutely. The divergent paths that were opening up between the two founders were becoming impossible to ignore. They were no longer trying to build the same machine. Jason Pierce was beginning to lean heavily into deep, expressive human emotion.
Less machine, more human.
Yes, he was becoming fascinated with the traditional structures of gospel music and soul, aiming for a sound that produced a feeling of high spiritual elation, yearning, and release.
He wants to take the listener to church. He wants the drone to feel like a spiritual ascension.
Exactly. But Peter Kember, on the other hand, was pulling in the exact opposite direction. He was moving further away from human emotion, diving deeper into cold, clinical, highly experimental electronic minimalism.
So they're practically at war, creatively.
He was becoming more fascinated by pure sound design, vintage analog synthesizers, and creating music that felt like a sterile laboratory experiment.
And the track list on Playing with Fire really illustrates this tug of war. You have deeply emotional, almost mournful songs like Honey and Lord Can You Hear Me, which clearly have Pierce's fingerprints all over them.
Very soulful track.
Then you have the terrifyingly abrasive track Suicide, paying homage to their early mechanical influences.
Sure, Kember.
Right, but the absolute focal point of this era, and perhaps their entire career, is the track Revolution. And it's fascinating because Revolution is described as the ultimate distillation of everything Spacemen 3 stood for, right at the exact moment they were falling apart.
It's lightning in a bottle.
It takes simple repetition, cranked to a massive volume, and somehow manages to perfectly synthesize both the clinical trance-like state that Kember loved and the soaring emotional elation that Pierce was chasing.
Revolution is the sound of those two opposing ideologies perfectly balanced for 5 explosive minutes. You have this unrelenting, mechanical, fuzzy groove that sounds completely sterile and punishing. But over the top of it, you have this yearning, soaring vocal delivery. It's the sacred and the profane locked together.
But honestly, how do you even function in a recording studio when the two leaders of the band are on completely different planets creatively? One of you wants to create this deeply emotional, gospel-tinged rock, taking the audience to a spiritual high, and the other wants to put the audience in a sterile electronic laboratory to run psychoacoustic experiments.
It sounds like a nightmare.
Not to mention, they are both heavily self-medicating at this point. It sounds like an impossible working environment. Who is calling the shots?
No one was. And that was the problem. It was impossible. By this point, absolutely everything was failing. The singular musical direction that held them together had splintered into two opposing ideologies. There were constant, bitter struggles for creative control over the mixing desk.
Literally fighting over the faders.
Yeah, their personal friendship was completely breaking down to the point where they couldn't be in the same room together. And yes, as you mentioned, this was all being massively exacerbated by escalating substance abuse issues. The shared illusion that had allowed them to build this massive minimalist universe was shattering into a million pieces.
And that shattering leads directly to their final album together, which was released in 1991, titled Recurring. And it is fascinating and deeply sad how literal the breakup is on this record.
It's so stark.
It's an album by a band in name only. They didn't even record it together. They refused to be in the studio at the same time. The album is physically split down the middle.
A completely divided record.
Right. If you buy the vinyl record, side A is entirely Jason Pierce's songs, recorded by himself with his own session musicians. And side B is entirely Peter Kember's songs, recorded by himself. It is quite literally the audio document of a messy divorce pressed into wax.
It's really tragic when you think about it.
Following the release of Recurring, the band finally dissolves in 1991 without ever playing a farewell tour or resolving their issues.
Usually, in the narrative arc of rock history, when a band violently breaks up like that, that's the end of the story. The members might go on to do minor solo projects that no one listens to, but the magic is gone. The chemistry is dead.
That's the classic cliche.
But for Spacemen 3, the explosion that destroyed the band didn't just scatter debris, it actually seeded entire new galaxies of music. Their breakup is arguably one of the most creatively fertile breakups in music history.
That perfectly sets up the final leg of our journey today. The splintered universes and the massive enduring legacy that Spacemen 3 left behind. Let's track the immediate aftermath because it proves just how distinct those two clashing visions had become.
Oh, they went in completely different directions.
The two founders take their competing ideas from Playing with Fire and fully realize them in separate projects. Jason Pierce takes his gospel, orchestral, deeply emotional drone and forms the band Spiritualized.
A phenomenal band.
And if you know 90s alternative rock, you know Spiritualized. They go on to create the legendary 1997 album, Ladies and Gentlemen, We Are Floating in Space, which is considered an absolute masterpiece of the era, fusing heavy drone with massive choirs and string sections.
It's the ultimate realization of his Church of Noise. He finally got to build that cathedral. Meanwhile, Peter Kember follows his path into experimental minimalism.
Back to the lab.
Exactly. He forms the Project Spectrum, diving even deeper into electronic soundscapes, vintage synthesizers, and eventually carving out a highly respected, decades-long career as an experimental producer and collaborator for artists who want that authentic vintage drone sound.
So they both found their lanes.
Both men found immense critical and artistic success by finally unspooling the two tangled threads of Spacemen 3.
But their impact goes way, way beyond their own subsequent bands. Looking at the history of 90s indie rock, there is a very bold but very well-supported claim about their most immediate legacy, Spacemen 3, basically birthed the entire genre of shoegaze.
And this is where their philosophy of the drone device truly changed music history. If we look at the timeline, before bands like My Bloody Valentine, Slow Dies, or Ride became globally famous for their massive, swirling, effects-heavy guitar textures.
Right, that whole scene, the British press cheekily named shoegaze because the guitarists were constantly staring down at their massive pedal boards.
Exactly. Before all of them, Spacemen 3 had already invented the foundational concept. They invented the radical idea of using the guitar as a wall.
Using the guitar as a wall. I love that phrasing. It goes right back to that paint bucket analogy, but it's even more architectural. They aren't playing notes. They are constructing physical boundaries of sound. They are building the room you are standing in.
Precisely. They fundamentally changed the protagonist of rock music.
Oh, explain that.
Think about it. For decades, the protagonist of a rock song was the melody. It was the vocal hook or the catchy lead guitar riff. The backing band just supported that melody. Spacemen 3 shifted the focus so that the protagonist of the music was the space itself.
The space itself is the star.
Yes. The atmosphere, the texture of the distortion, the vibrating air in the room became the focal point. The vocals were just another texture buried in the mix. This approach directly influenced a massive wave of bands. Groups like Loop and Flying Saucer Attack are direct, immediate disciples of this philosophy.
They paved the way.
Spacemen 3 taught a whole generation how to make incredibly loud, abrasive music sound impossibly beautiful and dreamlike.
So we've talked a lot about the 80s and the 90s, but what does this all mean for you listening to us right now? You might be thinking, okay, this is a fascinating history lesson about an underground band with a wild story, but how does this connect to my life today in the 2020s?
That's the real kicker here.
Well, think about how you consume audio right now. Think about the massive popularity of ambient music playlists on Spotify or Apple Music. Think about the deep focus playlists you put on when you need to study or code, or the drone and white noise channels you stream to help you fall asleep.
It's everywhere.
Our modern digital lives are completely saturated with this desire for immersive, textural, ambient soundscapes.
It raises a profound question about how we interact with music today. And it perfectly explains why Spacemen 3 is undergoing a massive critical reevaluation right now among young listeners.
A totally new audience finding them.
Yeah. If you look at how we consume media, modern listeners are actively seeking out music that functions on two entirely different levels simultaneously.
What do you mean?
Well, first, it needs to be deeply immersive background music BGM that can block out the distractions of the open-plan office or the crowded subway and just help you focus.
Right, functional music.
But secondly, it also needs to contain enough sonic depth and texture that if you stop working, close your eyes and actively listen, it completely envelops you. Spacemen 3's music, almost entirely by accident, functions perfectly in both of those realms.
They were decades ahead of the curve. They accidentally invented the antidote to the modern attention economy.
They really did.
And it's not just streaming. Think about modern immersive live experiences. We have massive drone festivals now. We have these huge audiovisual installation concerts where you don't look at a stage. You walk around a warehouse while light and sound physically wash over you.
Total sensory immersion.
All of that owes its conceptual existence to Spacemen 3's core realization in those dingy clubs in 1986. They realized that a concert didn't have to be a performance you merely watch from a distance. It could be an environment that you step into.
They shifted the paradigm from viewing music as an event to experiencing music as an environment. And that is a profoundly modern way of engaging with sound. They predicted the future of how we listen.
It really is incredible when you trace the lineage. So to wrap up this massive journey we've been on today, we started with a couple of bored, frustrated kids in the gray provincial town of Rugby, staring at their record collections, trying to find a way out of the sheer dullness of their reality.
Just looking for an escape.
And instead of trying to play faster or louder or more complicated than everyone else, they chose the radical, difficult path of subtraction. They stripped away the pop hooks, they threw out the chord progressions, they abandoned the guitar solos, they actively refused to entertain the audience visually, and they committed entirely to the drone.
And it changed everything.
They became the architects of a massive, roaring, minimalist universe that not only birthed the entire shoegaze movement, but laid the hidden, vibrating foundation for the modern, ambient, and immersive audio culture we live in today. They prove that you don't need complexity to create something profound, just need to commit entirely to the sound.
And that idea of subtraction leaves us with a fascinating, broader concept to ponder well beyond music.
Oh, I like where this is going.
Spacemen 3 realized that by ruthlessly stripping away everything unnecessary, the complex chords, the flashy solos, the desperate need to visually entertain an audience, the desire to be universally liked, they actually created a much larger, more expansive, and more immersive space for the human mind to wander.
By removing the clutter.
Yes. So in our current era, where you are constantly, relentlessly bombarded with more information, more notifications, more content, more demands on your attention, what is an area of your own life where a radical act of subtraction might actually set your mind free?
I love that. A question of what you can remove to make the room feel bigger, something to think about the next time you put your headphones on and try to drown out the world. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of noise. Keep seeking out the quiet spaces, or if you're feeling adventurous after today, go find the very, very loud spaces. Until next time.